Welcome, everyone. Today's presentation is with DAMA Winnipeg, and our speaker today is Noel Gelineau from Wawanesa, and the topic is data lineage and the downstream impacts. Why do we care? So I'm really interested in finding out why we actually do care about data lineage and downstream impacts. And we have a habit here at DAMA Winnipeg of letting the presenter and speaker introduce themselves. I'm sure I could tell you a few things about Noel, but he's a better man than I to tell you all about himself. So with that, Noel, please, sir, take it away.
Oh, I got to toot my own horn here. All right. Actually, this is more profile picture from my old MNP days. Actually, I was able to. It's the one that I look younger in, so it looks it looks better. But as you can tell, I've been working with Wawanesa for the last 3 years. Previous to that, a consulting firm on MNP for many years as a developer, data architect, anything that consulting data consulting would bring me to. And then the passion for me is actually data. It's always been, it always will be. I'll probably retire in data because there's just so much to do, so much to change as well over the years. So, and two other things that I would encourage other people to do is certifications as well. Like I've got my CBIP, Certified Business Intelligence Professional from TWI or ICCP, so that's the Data Warehouse Institute, and then the CDMP, Certified Data Management Professional, through DAMA actually. So it's actually double whammy. So those have been in, kind of took those exams a while ago. I don't even know if they're actually relevant to, to today's standard. But
the CDMP
for today's session,
definitely is valid, buddy. I just got mine a year ago, and it really comes up often. It's really quite delightful to have a reference book that we can all agree to. It's like a playbook, right?
It is like the CDMP is based on the DAMA, the Book of Knowledge there, so the DM box. So that's why it's a little more useful. If I had to pick the two, I would probably take that exam first. If anything, if I had to pick nowadays, so that's kind of the more industry standard one. So, but for today's session, it's only 20 slides. I don't have that many slides to go through. So please bear with me. I haven't had an attempt to try to go through any of these slides with anyone else before. So it's entirely green. I'm not even sure if all the slides even work. So hopefully that works just fine. And the slides are not designed to give you answers to everything. It's actually more to spark discussion. It's actually meant to be highly interactive. If anyone wants to speak up, raise your hand. I think there's the raise hand feature in Teams, not Teams, in Zoom, same thing. And I'm not here to provide answers to everything, but more discussing challenges that we are seeing, that I've seen the last, God, how many years? 3-4 years in this subject, because it is a very difficult subject to solve. Difficult problems around it, things like that. And then, so the part of ground rules, just at the end of each slide, as I said, I'm going to pause, ask if anyone wants to contribute or ask any questions, and then move on to the next one until we reach till the end of the meeting and the end of the session, which will be about, hopefully I don't want to take more than an hour, and then we'll leave room for discussion at the end, and then we'll call it a night. All right.
Sounds good, buddy. Let's hit it.
So before I really start going here, before I actually even show this slide, can all of you guys put in the chat what data lineage means to you? This terminology, this term has been used different ways over the years, and there's been some confusion what it actually means. So if you guys can type in the chat, it could be a couple words. What does data lineage actually mean to you as part of your definition? I'm actually interested in what other people are thinking what it actually means. And I'll pick up some keywords from source to source system where it originates from. That's a good point. Data lifecycle, I love that one. Visualization, yeah. Downstream, data flow. Oh, then if it's data flow, then see there's a data flow, let's put a DFD together and then we're done. Call it a night. Linkage, yeah. I think one of the products we're using, they use the word stitching in some cases to stitch data together, because sometimes the automated rules are not there. Cool. Source to target. Sounds like I'm ETL mapping on that one. I've got a lot of ETL background, so that's where we'll probably where that's coming from. Cool. So this one, you guys kind of got it right with all the data lineage verbiage here with regards to tracking from origin to source, explains different processes around the transformation rules. So people don't realize, well, we transform data. Well, we don't create data, we transform it. So as it transforms, aggregates, it actually changes, morphs into something different. And then the big thing is the use cases. The word trust is a big one that's used everywhere. Users will understand where it's coming from and they'll trust the data. So they don't think it's created on the fly or it's not accurate, for example. And then the metadata around it allows the metadata, whether it's business metadata or technical metadata, to provide that kind of flow of data and understand it and define it. And then also the lineage is essential to keep it associated. At the end of the day, you got reports and analytics that actually report the data. So just to give you a visual on how complex this is, this is just I don't know where I got this diagram. It's one of the documents that we've produced over the years. And this is just from data warehousing all the way to the data warehouse reports. And this is not even going back to source systems, just to give you an idea how complex that it can be when it comes to data lineage. If you showed me this, I'd be like, well, who cares? How do I know where my data come from? Which line is actually the stuff I'm interested in, right? That's where you can actually deep dive into some of that stuff. Cool. So before I do this, one other thing I start on this slide is actually in the chat. Can you put one word that describes the challenges of data lineage? And I'll leave it at that. I was going to put more detail, but the challenges around it, there's many, many challenges. I could probably talk, that's what I'm talking about it today. But what is the challenge around this? Trust. There you go. That's one for sure. Whether you trust the data or not. And what are the challenges you guys are seeing out there when it comes to data lineage? And it's got to be one word. Can't be much more than that. Come on, there's got to be somebody else. Consistency, yeah. Thanks, Shannon. Format, interesting. Okay. Yeah, that's more the technical aspect of it, and the tools. Oh, okay. There are a lot of shiny tools that vendors drop in front of you, right? That's like, oh, here's the thing that does everything. And we're not going to talk much about tools today, but there is definitely lots out there. Some could do some things, but there's no one tool that does everything that typically wants what we want done around this. Integrity, cool. Yeah, no, that's huge. Integrity is huge. Yeah, if you have two data sets that don't match, how's the integrity? How are you supposed to join those two data sets together? Okay. So I'm going to have a lot of Dilbert, comics in this slide as well, because it's a little more informal, and it's always for a good laugh. In this case, it's finding out where the data came from, and sometimes you don't know where it came from, and sometimes you just take it as faith, right? It's like, well, is it truly where it's from? And sometimes you may never know where it came from. You just take for face value, that's correct, and move on, and you don't doubt it. And then the number one question I usually get when it pertains to data lineage from when another manager from somewhere else or from another line of business in the organization will ask me, where does my data come from? And can I trust it? Is usually the follow-up question to that. And it's not a black and white answer, right? You've all heard of SSOT, the single source of truth. That's where it usually comes down to, like, well, this data actually belongs to 5 different systems upstream. But where does it really come from? Where is the final source of truth where it is managed, maintained, and really as the gold copy of all of our data? Sometimes that's a debate. You can get into MDM, customer master data, all that stuff. That's a pretty sensitive topic in that area. And one scenario I usually get is every data analyst nightmare is typically one main thing that you'll get a response from different various users that they'll say something else. Oh, where'd you get the data for this? The data I found it in a spreadsheet somewhere. As to where it was emailed to me, and there's absolutely no lineage from that. It came through an email and from somebody that they trust, and who knows how that data got created. That's a big problem. So anyone who's doing data analysis, impact analysis, you can't. It's undetermined. So it's actually a huge black hole. And then to follow up from that, they decided, oh, it looks good. So I modified it for my purpose and passed it on to others. So it's actually double the effect, triple the effect downstream. And that's things we try to avoid as much as possible, because if you do that all over the place, the data is just flowing everywhere. You have the multiple versions of it, and there's no consistency. I think somebody told an integrity of the data. So those are things you want to avoid when it comes to where does my data come from. Another question I usually get is actually, I see this questionable value on my dashboard. Where is it in the source system? I see it's a metric for, I'm in insurance, so premium data, written premium for this specific policy. Where can I find that in the source system? Because I can't find it. And then it's, oh, okay, then dig into it, and it's actually not from that system, it's from a different system. So that is one question that actually is answered by data lineage, is where did it come from? Because people want to know to validate that it is what it is, where it should be coming from, and it's exactly right. And so of course there's no easy answer to that question. And what I typically see as answers, we do have a set of specs that we've written over the years that has all the transformation mapping spreadsheets. And I'm like, here you go. Here's our SharePoint area that you can actually go through, and I'm just sure it's in there somewhere. And usually that's not the right answer. Usually that actually provides more frustration than anything else. That's assuming those specs apply to your line of business or jurisdiction, which sometimes may not. May only apply to Canada, US, and therefore they may not even be there. And you're also assuming they're all kept to date. We all know documentation tends to be the last thing gets updated, and a lot of times it does not. So sometimes it'll be out of date, and we've seen that. It's hard to be perfect on that point. Any other comments on this slide that anyone like to share? I'm sure a lot of people can relate.
I liked what you said, Noel, about the documentation being out of date. Right. It's really hard to fully trust documentation.
Mm-hmm. Even our own developers and analysts don't trust it sometimes. It's like, well, this thing hasn't been updated in 2 years. I'm pretty sure we've changed it last year. Therefore, I'm going to go directly to our Informatica mappings in this case to really see what's actually in production today. So it's true, but then you're not depending on the documentation, which is, a lot of people put a lot of time and effort in those things. Cool. I don't see any hands up, so that's good. And moving on is when it comes to data lineage, some people from when we use them actually recognize this diagram. It's actually a real diagram from 2016. And
I know the guy that created
financial, I know too. He's one of our main architects. And I purposely fuzzed it out because it's all the systems names on there. But this is just all systems that are that provide financial data in some way or shape or form. And this is in 2016. So this provides just the complexity of all the systems we deal with and all the interactions and the lines, and it's highly accurate. I used to follow this as I used to have it printed and just using it as reference, and it shows everything around external applications, internal apps, and the connectivity, the data between them that flow, and the ones in orange are SaaS, software as a service. In 2016, we only had about 3 of them. In today's world, it's about half, right? So, things have been migrating to cloud for past SaaS systems for years, right? Now, actually, half is actually probably on the low side in most organizations these days. These days, we're probably most industries have like 3/4 into cloud, right? In one shape or form. Kids, who else can relate to this slide? The complexity of that. Anyone have any horror stories around similar situations like this where there's just too much?
Yeah, I would say, Noel, this is a pretty common scenario, as you well know, in the clients that we tend to work with, MNP, large number of legacy data sources, new applications being introduced, and everyone trying to figure out where everything came from. So
yeah, very common. And for most companies, Oasis being a pretty small compared to other ones out there, right? Some of them are even way more complicated than this. I totally agree. And it goes to the question, how many layers does my data go through, right? It's actually pretty simple in some cases, very rare cases, but most of the time you're talking about potentially maybe a spreadsheet that you use. And then use that spreadsheet to populate, import into a database. It could be an application database, could be your CRM, ERP system, your retail system. You may bring in data as an import for policy, for retail data, product data, anything like that. And then from there, the way you extract the data, you might use a data streaming platform like Kafka in this case, or any other one out there to actually stream the data. That's more modern type technology to stream the data out almost real time. And from there, you may have an ESB layer or a RESTful type services layer for the APIs where you can attach and grab an XML payload of some kind to get that data in a different format. And from there, you can actually dump it into a data lake just because you want the raw data there and for usage for many purposes, including predictive analytics and many other purposes where they want the raw data. And from there, you actually may want to put into your data warehouse to file entirely curated data. And from there, you can have your BI platform, to create cubes to actually aggregate large amounts of data. Then you may have dashboards that run from there. And based on those dashboards, you may export to a spreadsheet. And it's all full circle at the end of the day. So you may have the exact same piece of data where you started with, may end up at the end of the day going through about 7 or 8 different layers. And that's pretty common. And the traceability of that is just astronomical. And some of the things that we've seen, these are just tip of the iceberg, right? There's many other ways you could transform the data and have different mode of transports between systems. And we even talked about cloud, right? Cloud platforms now have different ways you can actually do that too. And one thing about what we talked about that we're actually seeing is actually non-prod environments. Data obfuscation, data filtering may additionally change that data even more. It's not even on the diagram here because when it comes to non-prod systems, you want to hide that production-like data in some cases. And sometimes there's just too much data of it. You may want to I just want 2022 data. The rest irrelevant for our non-prod environment. So that's all the challenges we're seeing. Any other? I'm actually going to pause and give the group any other layers you guys actually work with that deemed as your kind of I just took the top 7 that I've seen over the years, but I'm sure there's many more. Any other layers you guys see that you guys like to add to the list here? If I was a vendor, I'd probably have about 10.
Yeah, yes, I could talk about the intermediate steps when we do ETL. Then it go through a set of transformations, and it's not just one database. Could be more than one transformation within the same database. Then it adds complexity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see that data transform over those different layers, obviously. So you get full transparency when it comes to any defects. But then you have to maintain all those extra layers, right? ETL is typically pretty common about staging the data pretty raw and then curating it with various transformation rules after the fact. Yeah, very typical. And this doesn't matter which platform you use. You could be using Cognos, MicroStrategy, Microsoft BI, Informatica. It doesn't really matter. They all basically follow the same pattern here.
We've got someone joining us who doesn't have, oh, I guess they do have a microphone. Forgive me, they don't have a video. But Shan was talking about data from vendors.
Mm.
She just added it in the comments there.
Yeah, no, Shannon, that's true. Like, you may get curated data vendor. Like, for example, you may purchase. The big one now is geospatial data from Canada Post or any of those type of services that we provide you as part of that paid service. Even data from pricing, for example, you might get pricing data from various sources. You may get weather data from a different service provider as well. So that's all coming in. That's not even on the sheet here. That's actually cloud stuff coming into your, that you're aggregating into the data. Great point. Yeah, we get lots of data that comes in from vendors and actually goes out to vendors because they provide services to help curate or validate the data. They might have analytical or machine learning capabilities or AI type things that provides some services around that too. It's usually cheaper that way, and they specialize in those areas. So it's not only coming in, but going out, and we're seeing more and more of that.
What about the privacy considerations of that, Noel?
Well, it's huge. It's actually getting more and more of a big issue now. The right to be forgotten is how do you go back in time to make sure they are, that's where obfuscation comes in and data masking. In this case, data purging. PII data, personal identifier, whether it's a name, phone number, your address, bank account, there's kind of more sensitive ones. Those have to be gone in some cases, right? Especially in the US. It's coming to Canada. Europe is the biggest one. GDPR is the regulatory compliance there. So Europe is leading the way on that one. I think Canada is actually not too far behind. So it's going to be pretty next couple, let's say 5 years by the time we fully implement some kind of GDPR type solution here. And Brian, I know you could talk about that too.
California has some good privacy laws.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they have the right to be forgotten. You can go to your, in our case, our company and say, you know what, I want you to purge me from your system. I don't have any policies with you anymore. I want you purge, and then we have to. It's by law, we need to purge that person from our systems entirely. Yeah, it is a challenge. Cool. So before I go to the next set of, there's 3 slides I'm going to present, basically 3 pictures. A lot of it's very visual. I like to be very visual. Is this problem? I've been trying to go through the DM box. Say, where does the DM box actually talk about this problem? And even the DAMA wheel itself, you guys have all seen this if you know DAMA and the DM box, the Data Management Book of Knowledge. It talks about all these artifacts, nothing around data lineage. It's got data governance in the middle that drives everything else, but nothing around data lineage. It's got pieces of it. These are artifacts that we generate over in the data world, but nothing around data lineage really. That's kind of, hopefully they change that. And even when it talks about governance in general, you have these great governance structures. I don't expect everyone to memorize this. Again, this is directly from the DM book. That you have your DGC, your council, all the committees, your stewards, all that stuff, technical, and everything else around it, and the services are defined around that, metadata, but it doesn't really talk about data lineage either, right? And I tried an attempt, actually, I think I wrote this in 2016 around having an enterprise data model of all of our data. Where does it categorize it? But it still doesn't tell you the flow of data. It just tells you where the buckets are, and that's it. That your data domains, which is a good start, but it doesn't tell you the lineage of data as it flows from system to system. Very high level. So with all that said, one thing that we've talked about is data quality. Data quality is quite an issue, is something that's getting more and more front and center. You want to be able to measure it, and it's got to be quantifiable, and it's got to be proven. And just the fact that we see people, it's like exactly what Dilbert says here. People have identified, oh, your data doesn't look right. Oh no, that data's been the same for 5 years, and you guys just notice it now. Oh, okay. And then you find out they're doing more deeper analysis of it, and they're finding trends that look concerning, that don't go in line with, and then it's true sometimes, and most of the time they're correct. They've just never used it in that sense, and they've encountering new issues that have been around for years, and we have to deal with it. Who can relate with that one? I would say, who's got a data quality issue story they'd like to share, maybe, or nightmare? I know a few guys have been in the trenches type data scenarios that hard to get out of, hard to explain, but have really caused issues without divulging too much. No, I guess everyone's perfect. All right, I'll try not to put anyone on the spot then. One thing that, so I'm going to get to, I've talked only about challenges and some of the issues and concerns around data lineage. And one question is, how do I know, is the genuine, the trust factor? How do I know my data is accurate? And there's different techniques. Stuff we've used in the past is we certify the data, whether it's certifying reports, whether it's certifying parts of the reports, the data sets that feed those reports, the cubes themselves, so they can be leveraged by the business, in our case, for their decisions, right? It's the only way you can certify, and it doesn't have to be 100% accurate. It could be within a variance of 0.01% as pertains to the source system. Sometimes it doesn't have to be 100%. Maybe when it comes to financial data, it has to be for regulatory concerns, but most of the time, if you're close enough, that's how you do it. You certify your data. You can't certify everything. You certify your biggest data sets. That's something we've been doing. Your business data partners are your best friend. I have to make that super important, because they know their own data. We can I have some data profiling, data analysis background, but you can profile the data all you want. The people that know that data is the one who actually are managing it or entering it. They know it best. It's essential that you get them involved in any data lineage solution. And they have to be able to be part of the solution you design, whether they're testers, whether they regression test for you, whether they just validate smoke testing. It doesn't matter. They need, or even part of the specs or the requirements. They need to be part of those activities. It's essential. If you don't, you're going to provide garbage. It's going to be. I've seen it so many times. And some of these users may be, I call them data savvy users. They would be data passionate users, very knowledgeable in areas like I mentioned. They could be data scientists too. Some of that, our biggest consumer of our data that we produce are the analytics group. They love the data. They want more of it. We just can't, there's just not enough to give around. And then source systems subject matter experts. Those guys are essential for any type of accuracy of definition of that data.
Noel, what about, are you going to mention data stewards, or is that coming up, or could that be?
Well, that's kind of in my last bullet point is something we've coined at Montmagny, is the concept of the insight analyst. An insight analyst is basically your heavy duty power users that tend to know the data really well. And those are we kind of built a community of practice around this, where they need to be part of a community that provides stewardship of data. And a lot of these are stewards in general. They will help define the data. And we just label them as an insight analyst to be able to quantify. And there's usually leaders that tend to be the enterprise stewards around this. that can probably make more executive decisions. But the inside analyst community of practice is the ones that are basically your stewards. And you have to give them a voice. So that's why I put the word TM in there. I don't know if it's an actual term we've coined, but that's what we've used over the last year or so. Great question, Andrew. You kind of read my mind on that one. So, any other question? Any other comments on this one? I mean, I didn't go very technical. I kind of stayed very generic on the business side, but even though I'm very pretty technical in nature. Okay. Before I go to the next, I think, yeah, before I go to the next slide, oh, somebody has a comment? No? Okay. Can you guys provide in the chat some of the tools and techniques you use to help with data lineage and downstream impacts? There's so many things out there that you can help, but I'm actually curious on the group who uses what. You could provide vendor names if you want, but it's really, I really want to know about techniques. Scanners, yeah. Yeah, developers from other systems, yeah. Yeah, the experts are the ones that provide experts from those vendors directly, right? Like for us, for cloud, for example, we're an AWS shop, so we actually provide a lot of, we get a lot of help from the AWS side of things. Mm-hmm. And one other thing that I like to also provide some awareness is just because you got lots of data from various different systems mashed together doesn't mean it's actually better. It could be better, it could be worse, but a lot of times it just multiplies the the graveness of the data quality issues you will encounter, guaranteed. Putting more data together doesn't actually make it better. Some questions I guess is people like, well, the data is 90% there for my purposes. I just need the extra 10%, and then I can really use it, right? So, so the question is, can I supplement the data to make it better? And does anybody have an answer to that? So actually in the chat, can you guys put yes or no? If you just simply supplement a data set, will it make it better? I'm using the word better because it's very generic. I'm doing that on purpose. I like to know how many yes, no's there are. One no, one yes. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Andrew, you're cheating. Yes, when I'm interested in the data set, yeah.
No, what I mean by that is that let's say you've got a blank attribute, right, or a field in the column, right, and that there's lots of other columns or attributes alongside within that record, right? Sometimes what is blank can be derived or deduced or even specifically calculated from another attribute. For example, if a parent is missing in this blank field I just mentioned, yet there's a child attribute in a child data element in a similar attribute, but it's a child, right? Then you can deduce who the parent is. And that's what I mean by sometimes yes. Often no, but sometimes yes.
Yeah, derive the data in different ways.
right? So now if it's
Assuming you had the
incorrect,
rules correct.
yeah, if it's
Yeah.
incorrect, it's harder. But if it's empty, sometimes it can be derived. So,
Mhm.
you know, I didn't think I was really cheating.
The derive thing is good in the spur of the moment, short term. The problem with derived attributes is that the application you're grabbing it from may also derive it in that same fashion. And guess what? If an upgrade happens to that application over the year, and there probably will be, changes those rules, those
Mhm.
calculation derived rules, guess what? Your downstream systems are out of date, impacted, and you probably don't know about it. So you're calculating it wrong as of when that patch was applied, for example. And we've seen that so many times. So we try to stay away from derived attributes as much as possible, even though we try to say, well, you got to store it persistently and then we'll grab it. That's typically the answer, and the application team says, no, that's not part of best practices, which is not from an application development perspective, it's not. So that's where you have these rules engines that you can implement to actually do it for you, right?
So
which is really expensive.
okay, so now you're bringing a good discussion point, right?
Mm.
And is an empty value better than something that could be derived? Admittedly, it's not as good as the true, you know, true data as it could and should be. But is nothing better than something that you can likely figure out
I
if
don't
it's
know.
likely correct?
That's a good. I have an answer for that one, but
Right.
maybe someone else can answer
I
that.
appreciate that it's not a best practice, but you know, if you've got a null and there's a hint in the record set that you're dealing with, within the record of the data set, I should say, that it strikes me that, you know, you might be able to use some of that information.
Yeah, and you gotta be careful there too, because maybe null means something. Maybe it means I don't know. Yes, no, and blank. Actually, may mean actually something.
It
Right?
could.
So
It could. In the specific case that I'm thinking of, right? You asked for a data quality example, and I kind of stayed mum on it, but that I've seen a situation where some OS operating system data is missing from some of the records within the column for OS, right? But that you know, you can kind of tell whether it's a Windows or a desktop, if it's a Windows Server, Windows Desktop, depending on some of the other columns. And if you can deduce that from one or more of the other columns, why not put in, you know, you might not know specifically what desktop OS it is. Is it 7? Is it 8? Is it 10? But that you can confirm that it's not Linux, for example, and it's not a server, right? And then maybe you could make a best guess, and 8 times out of 10, it's Windows 10.
Yep.
You know, and in this case, a null was absolutely wrong, right? And it has to be the fact that a null was wrong. It's just missing data.
Yep.
Right.
And you'll see that all the time, right? You'll see that everywhere, especially if you're dealing with legacy systems that are quite different and very holy. And as an example, I'll give an example of something similar. Oh, there. What is Shannon? Depends on the scenario. Complexity can cause derived values to be incorrect. Source system is best. Null can mean at a point in time the data was unimportant at that time, and then later on it was implemented. And one example that's similar to that, Shannon, I'm sure you're used to, is we have something called business segment that's in the policy world for auto policies. Business segment usually is commercial or personal. So your auto policy, if you're running a fleet, you're commercial. If you're running a Uber, you would be commercial. So the whole rule is if you have one auto on that policy that is deemed as commercial, your entire policy is deemed as commercial by default. Although they may change those rules a year from now, who knows? Maybe they may require that all your vehicles are deemed as commercial in order for your policy to be deemed as commercial. So it's one of those gray areas, and we've, something that we implemented last year is a derived rule, and it just didn't work. So that's why we did this persistent approach on that data. So everyone's got examples of this, and that was the only way we can get the data consistently across the systems. And it took a lot of convincing, let's just say, but it was the right choice. And then
okay,
my answer to that, oh, go ahead.
Oh no, that is what I wanted to ask you, because then I said, okay, what is your answer?
My general answer is no.
Okay.
But
Okay,
like
I
what
was
Andrew said, there are
getting
exceptions to
nervous
the
here.
rule.
Yeah.
If your quality of your data is poor in general, which it could be, supplementing with other data, there's the false conception that it's going to make it better. And you know what? It's typically
Right.
not true. Simply adding additional attributes as a join or combining two data sets as a union, you're going to make garbage data even trashier. I'm going to be blunt there. So it's not going to work unless you get some data quality things on top of it. That's assuming the data is not in the greatest shape. On the flip side, as Angie would say, you can apply extra data throughout your lineage lifecycle, data lifecycle, to apply data quality cleansing techniques to validate the values and rows of data. And as a result, you get that curated data set that people trust, right? That's where you can implement supplementary data and make it better. Not to add extra attributes, but it's more to actually validate the data. Oops. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that one. That's how we've gotten around it.
Dude, you changed my life. I've never even heard even trashier. I'm going to use that.
I don't even know if that's a word. I just use it as an adjective there.
I might have to quote you, buddy. That's
well, we've all heard the term garbage in, garbage out. Like
Yes,
I think I've seen it on every data type of discussion I've ever. It's true because it is true, but this is kind of putting in a different sense. This is not so much data lineage, but this sparked an interesting question I'd like to ask the group as well, is what are some of the ways you profile data? Some of the techniques, profiling data is one of those key things you can determine where the data is right now as it pertains to where it was, in the source system. What are some of the techniques you guys, even the tools that that you guys leverage to profile your data efficiently? And I've seen data profiling tools in the past too, that some were good, some were bad. If a couple of people that I've worked with in the past would have some extra commentary around that, I'm sure. Does everyone know what data profiling is all about? It's basically understanding your data, basically a data set or a table or whether it's a file, CSV file, doesn't really matter. How do you find ways to understand your data, the quality behind it, the metadata behind it, without even knowing anything about it? I guess nobody uses data profiling. One thing I like to share is that as much as people frown on the use of, that's why a SQL, you're still got relational databases out there. SQL, I think, is still king. SQL has been around since '92, so it's still used as that query language. There's other vendors out there that has changed to something else, or they put a 4GL language in front of it, but underneath the hood, it's still SQL, right? It's still highly dependent on indexes and stuff like that. So that helps you profile your data, figure out your min maxes of your data sets, and even your averages that you have to go back to the source system, or even your sums. That'd be part of that validation. And then somebody in the chat put format. You could probably figure out date formats as part of your. There might be dates that are just garbage in their correct format. You may have 2-digit years where you could say, well, is that 1900 or is that 2000? So these weird things that are pointing to that quality of profiling the data.
Noel, to emphasize the strength of SQL. I get a real kick out of the fact that a lot of the newer big data databases have gone out of their way to write a layer such that you can actually write SQL against their databases.
Yeah, I'm not
They weren't
surprised.
designed that way, but SQL does a good job.
It's all rows and columns at the end of the day. And I was just gonna say MongoDB NoSQL databases. I could debate on that one for a while. I've personally never used, I have to divulge, never, MongoDB or NoSQL databases, or even the graph databases.
Well, be careful, buddy.
they're-
It stands for not only SQL.
Oh,
not
that's
only
true. You're
SQL.
right. You're absolutely right. Not NoSQL, not only SQL. So maybe there's SQL in there too, right? I personally never used it. So Ranjit, thanks for that is something I was going to bring up. As kind of those really big data databases, right? Is it going to be a fad? I don't know. At the end of the day, people love their spreadsheets. And spreadsheet is really rows and columns. At the end of the day, that's what people understand.
I think one of the bigger differences between, because NoSQL and SQL can both be in a spreadsheet, it's more about the schema on read versus the schema on write.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A relational database has to be well developed, and before you make a write to it, you read the schema, right? But a big database doesn't care. It just doesn't care. It's a document database, and you just slam that data in. Now, when you want to go read it, it can be a challenge, right? It can be a challenge. I've recently been learning. Go ahead.
No, finish your thought there, Bruce. Andrew.
No, I was just going to say I've recently been learning Splunk, which is a big data database, right?
Yeah.
For transactional analysis, and of course, it's a big data database. But then you want to do your analysis of it, and what do they tell you immediately? That you have to develop indexes. So hang on, you actually have to do some schema on read, even though it's actually big databases are schema on write. And that you've got to do some upfront designing, because it is possible to use a NoSQL database without the least bit of database design. It's a disaster, but you can do it, right? Mm-hmm. And that the real sweet spot is, somewhere in between. That sometimes you've got to over-design things, and you've got to, everything just has to be absolutely perfect in an SQL database or a relational database, right? And of course, maybe it's too much, right? Somewhere in the middle might be the best.
Yep, I agree. And just to add to that as well, like there's the new thing now, JSON files. Right? You see JSON in every type of integration nowadays, right? It's so easy to use in web-based applications anywhere. But then you got the compressed files as well, Parquet file format, Avro file formats, which are hard to work with. They're not readable, right? So you need a writer, you need some kind of front-end query tool to make sense of it. So all these formats that are evolving, what is going to be in 5 years? I absolutely no idea. I did not see that JSON would be so big, for example, in today's standard versus 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It's amazing. Something so simple. And then now I want to get into how do we match it from the source where it came from? And really, I can really summarize really in 3 words. Number 1, reconcile. Number 2, reconcile. Number 3, reconcile. Reconciliation is essential for any type of validation from source system to destination. We do quite a bit of it. We've been tasked to do more of it, but it's very expensive to build, maintain over time, but it gives you that factual, down to the penny in some cases, that, okay, I match the source system. And it's the only way you can really do it. We've got entire dashboards around this. It's pretty technical sometimes, but it gives us that genuine confidence that the data is exactly, we may not know it by the end of the month, or maybe even by the end of the day, by the time we get the aggregation of everything. But reconciliation is, I think, it's key for any type of reconciling financial data. Transaction matching, for example, is another big one to reconcile data for finance. I know we have something called Blackline, which helps us reconcile the data down to the penny. And if it's off by, $12, $10, rewrite it off, right? It is, in the grand scheme of things, pretty small as a manual adjustment. So, there's all these little tools and techniques you can do to reconcile the data. And then beyond that, not just reconciling the data, but also actually just came across this today, just talking to as part of a backlog grooming Scrum session, is working with the business to identify metrics that prove that the data is better quality than before. They're like, well, you're doing all this work to improve the quality of your data in their data warehouse. How can you prove it? And the only way you do that is you take out baselines that, okay, the data is 10% inaccurate based on these rules. We do fix it, and now it's actually 2% or 1%. And you've left out all the exceptional test cases. And that's the only way. And actually that will help with two things. It'll help with prioritizing work, because you can actually get the bigger data quality issues out of the way from source system to destination. And then actually, more importantly, is actually to tell those success stories that not only do your team understand, but the business can fully understand in their terms and terminology. Yeah, our loss ratio for our claims actually is really low because of the higher data quality. I'm talking claims in terminology here, but and metrics, because we use 1,000 different metrics for 1,000 different things, right? But that's how you can actually sell it, and the business can really actually adopt it as well. I'd like to hear from the group, how else do they validate their data? Any other techniques? This one I want to hear from somebody, because there's gobs of other ways of doing it. I know the ones who's from Moanisa, so I'll give you guys a pass, unless you want to prove me wrong. No, manual compare to prove code is correct. Yeah, it is time consuming. Any regression testing around manual compare. We've used Python, for example, to do some of that automatically for some regression tests. Use it to match it from other data from vendor, and it's always not correct. Big surprise. Yeah, you'll never get 100% correctness, right? Especially if you're dealing with highly volatile data, like weather data, or even geospatial data. It might be a little off, but as long as it's close enough, the business usually doesn't care. It's what is that threshold where it's good enough. Good old MVP process. Minimal viable product. Used and abused. Trust me. And you have to debate. Yeah, exactly. Anything with any good debate, you have to have your facts behind you, right? You got to have your data behind you on anything around that. Whether it's counts, whether it's aggregation. It's true. And one last thing I'd like to really highlight is change is hard. Now, I don't mean this from the sense of life in general. When your life goes through life-changing events, it's hard. Data change is hard. Any change of data from the source system down to is hard to manage, hard to track, and hard to recover. Sometimes the changes have already occurred. 3, 4, 5 days later, you found out your data warehouse is partially corrupt because of that change. Holy crap. So you have to go back and actually rebuild certain facts and dimensions because of that corruption or that change. And I've gone through this, not fun. So we've been told that if you change any data upstream, you need to let us know. Otherwise, our dashboard users will be unhappy. Effective DIA. Now, I'm not going to say what DIA. Could somebody put what DIA stands for? I know that's a term that Womanius has used actually over the years, and we use the acronym all the time. And I'm like, well, DIA may not know, and everybody knows what that is. Can somebody make a guess with that acronym? Shannon, you must know that one. Or even Jeff. Jeff, you probably know that one too. Or Deerge, you should know that one too.
How about Elizabeth? Maybe she should know it too.
Yeah, she should. Yeah. Yeah, for us, it's called data impact assessment. That's key for any type of data impact. Like you can say, oh, this change is coming. How the hell do we deal with it? Do we fill in the blanks? Do we change our ETL processes? What in the world do we do so we don't blow up? So impact analysis on how much effort is required for any impact of change and quantify it, right? Before that happens. And then collaborating with, that's my second point, stop thinking in silos. The old way of thinking where we actually control our own fate is actually entirely not true. It's actually, in today's standards, it's really a misnomer. If you don't interact with your source system technical teams, you will not, you'll be so far behind the 8 ball that you won't be able to keep up. So that's why we always talk to all of our application developers and leaders that are coordinating those changes and looping us in. You know, so that's key in any type of change that's occurring. Actually, I thought I had another point on this slide, but I guess I stopped that too. We do have spreadsheets, so we used to use as kind of a template for this, but now it's mostly documenting through Jira and various other specs to help with some of these impact assessments.
That impact assessment, Noel, strikes me as a key part of the data governance.
Yeah, it could be.
It's a process, and when I think of processes, I think of governance, right?
Yep. Yeah, governance has its place, as long as it's not too much red tape in order to get it approved, for example. So we do something called grooming, for example. We'll groom where we don't need to do deep level analysis. We'll say, yeah, it's going to take us about, I don't know, 2 weeks of effort to deal with this change. And sometimes it'll be, oh my God, this will be 3 months. And it's just not our team. It's also the ESB team, maybe the BI team, maybe the other analytics team. And they'll say, you know what, it's just not worth it. And they go a different direction. So, and that's where governance comes into play. Or maybe they find a different way that's totally way better, right? Maybe some data is not meant for the data warehouse. Maybe a data lake might be better, or even just dumping it to a spreadsheet. As much as I hate to say that, sometimes that satisfies whatever needs they have. And then documenting change. I think this is brought at the beginning of when I was talking is whether they're at source, target systems, or even between. You got to document those changes. If you don't, nobody's gonna know about them. And then when things go wrong, then it's gonna be chaos. Nobody's gonna know what's happening. And this is where, actually, I had another point on this as well. Actually, maybe, okay. Actually, I must have missed it. Okay, maybe that's stop thinking silos. And I forgot the point here, avoid key person syndrome. We all have people that work in our organizations that have been around for years, and they're just the go-to people. Oh yeah, so-and-so knows, I'll use you know, a few, I won't use any names actually. He knows how this system works. He's the only person that knows how all these pieces stick together. And that's not a good thing. So that's why cross-training is key in order to just keep up. And that's sometimes practicing. And then as my last point, understanding the high level impacts by looking at the big picture. So this is kind of something I think I put together back in 2016, and where this is just it's also known as a context flow diagram, where it says all of our main systems. It's 2016, so it's really outdated, so I'm not too concerned with sensitive stuff here. You know, you do see our data warehouse, which connects to everything, MicroStrategy being our BR layer, Guidewire being our main insurance suite platform, PeopleSoft being our finance system, and various spreadsheets, and PMS being our legacy system, which we actually retired earlier this year. So that's gone. So all these great things that again, I have to actually update this spreadsheet, this diagram. Actually, it's way out of date. it's not even accurate anymore. So that's the key about keeping these things up to date. Right. And then the last slide I have is how do I operational manage data lineage? This is a whole other topic that actually I'm not even going to cover because I think I knew we'd run out of time because I'm not. This might be for next time. Maybe we'll do a part 2 to this because even I don't even have all the answers. I'm actually curious on how people are manage their data lineage efficiently. We've tried a few different products in the past, and there's no one-stop shop that does everything nicely, right? So that's kind of maybe I'll have something better in about a year from now. I don't know. I have to give the
Noel, does Microsoft have a data lineage tool?
I'm not aware of. They did have
it
one.
does. It does.
Yeah.
It's called Purview.
Mm-hmm.
Purview, yes.
Is it well regarded or?
Pardon me?
Is it well regarded?
I'll tell you in 2 months.
It's a very new product. It just came out of beta,
Right.
less than a year ago, and the earliest reviews of it weren't great. It was I think a pretty immature product relative to some of the better solutions out there like Calibra and Talent and things that can support that. But
Yeah.
they're working with it. It's getting better. Yeah, I hope to get some experience with it. It looked interesting.
Yes, and
Check that out.
I have an opinion about that. Can I give it?
Are you kidding
Please
me?
do. This is the Q&A and comments time of the
Yeah,
discussion.
there's I believe we should have all the tools available for data lineage that we could get into. Even if there are 2 or 3 in a company, just and they work separately, or you cannot put them together, but you have the lineage in one environment, you have the lineage for the other environment, and it's so different the understanding that you have of a business when you have lineage than when you don't have any lineage. It changes completely the way you see all the processes and impact analysis and everything. And then I don't think we should talk about one tool, but just go and purchase them all. That is my thing. I'm very crazy about that. I think how can we live without lineage, actually? Because that improves the way that improves the way we do analysis. Like it's way faster. It's a couple minutes versus 3 weeks, 1 month.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you've gone through all the specs and all the transformation rules we've had documented over the years. Which one's quicker, right? It may take hours to get defined to what you're looking for. It's like,
Right.
and then you may not even be right. So I'm glad to see Microsoft's doing some good strides on that. I know when we did some analysis, they didn't really have anything. Even a data quality tool, they didn't really have anything that was pretty substantial. But they've come a long way. I agree. Hopefully it'll be appropriately priced at the same time. But there are leaders out there like the Calibras of the world, and every couple of years there's something new. Like now it's whatever can do the data catalog component of it as well. It's no longer really no business glossary, data lineage, or even data business terms, for example, or technical metadata. The data catalog is what it's kind of the new terminology around that.
Hello.
But we could talk. Hey.
Hi, it's Elizabeth here. Sorry, Jolima, were you done with your thought, or can I?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Go, Elizabeth.
I just wanted to say something that I really do like about data lineage is it bridges the knowledge gap within an organization. So it makes everyone, to a large extent, have a good glimpse of what the organization's data looks like. And that's one important piece. And it drives an organization closer towards, better data literacy and all that good stuff. So I think that's one thing I really appreciate about Lineage.
Yep, understanding the data and its life cycle. You know, the literacy portion is huge, and that's the advantage. That's one of the some advantages of some of the tools that we've used in the past. Is some of them are so hard to use. You know, technical teams love it, but when it comes to end users, it's not intuitive, right? So you need those intuitive tools that tells them, okay, here's the data, and I can follow it, and here's some of the high-level rules being applied to it as to why these types of records are being dropped when I look at my dashboard. Those darn nulls, Andrew. we threw them out. They're no good, so therefore they're not being brought across, right? So that's prime example.
So Noel, speaking of the difficulty of data lineage, I'm just wondering, there's different types of users. I remember back in the olden days when I was an app developer, that there used to be really, grade A people that would help you with your app and they'd support you and they'd give you some feedback. Then there was the group in between, right, that, just kind of used it and, didn't really complain too much, but didn't help you either. And then there was the group that was the haters, right? And that these days, we talk about citizen data scientists quite often, and you even hinted that, although you didn't come right out and say it earlier on, with some of the with one of those lists that you were listing. I should probably remember it better, but I don't.
Yeah.
And that it strikes me that some of the people that do care about data, right, wouldn't necessarily have a problem, these citizen data scientists, with the data lineage tools, right? But maybe they still need to be dumbed down further so that the non-citizen data scientists, or I should say the average user, the average business user who isn't a data scientist, a citizen data scientist, can use easily, right? But you have to take an active interest in data. And I know many business users who just don't.
Yeah, it depends in the industry you're in. Like, for example, in insurance, we'll have actuaries, and they're all about the data. They're all about crunching the numbers, though. So they're basically our data champions.
Yeah.
And some more than others. Some may actually have background in R or Python or something else that they've built on their own. Like, wow, you've gone ahead of what we were planning to do for you, but good for you, right? We just don't support it because we didn't build it. But if they can maintain it and build it on their own, and it does their models just fine, hey, why not, right? So those are the type of the citizens that you referring to that could probably benefit from that. Cool. All right, any other questions? Any other comments? This is it. This is the Q&A session before we close her down. Or I said I'd keep it down to under 90 minutes. Actually, it was closer to about 70 minutes, 75 minutes.
This is awesome, Noel. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thanks, Brian. Great to hear from you. And thanks, Deirdre. I had to drop off. That's okay. Yeah, and I'm glad we're recording this, Andrew, so we can pass it on to anyone else.
And with that, maybe we'll stop recording shortly. So thank you to all the YouTube watchers who have stuck with us on this recording thus far. Hope you really appreciate it. If you are watching this on YouTube, by all means, please go to dama-winnipeg.org or find us on meetup.com/dama-winnipeg. And if you'd like to come to one of our Dataversity events, that'd be great. And of course, we continue to have monthly events just like this. So thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next time.